like a beautiful day today. So, if you are an entrepreneur or you have flexibility within your schedule, I really hope that you have the opportunity to kind of like go outside and enjoy the weather today. Wanted to talk about associate photographers because this is something that has come up and seemed like more of a valid option for wedding photography businesses that want to grow after the pandemic. So when we were looking at options of what to offer to our clients within the parameters of the pandemic, there were some times where we were unable to serve our particular clients, and so we had to contract out associate photographers. And so with that being said, it became more of a norm than it had been before. And people are now starting to understand that offering associate photographers is something that is a valid thing or a valid option for scaling and growing your business, or for serving clients that maybe you wouldn't necessarily be able to serve because of like date restrictions, budget restrictions. And now it's something that's more widely known, more widely done, more widely accepted. And so I think, though, with that being said, that offering associate photographers, and this is my own personal ethics around it, but I think that associate photographers should be a really intentional offering. I don't think it should be done flippantly. I don't think it should be done as like a one-off. I don't think it should be added into your brand portfolio unless you have certain things in place. I don't think it should be the traditional like studio model that used to be really popular, where a client would sign up with a studio and they wouldn't know who was going to be with them on their wedding day, but they would just trust that they would get like an okay photographer. And I don't think that is the way to go. It probably worked at some point in time in the past, and I think it probably does still work for specific types of clients. But if you're somebody who is very heart-centered and intentional as a business owner, I think that that level of intentionality should flow not only to what you personally offer as a wedding photographer, but also what your associates offer as a wedding photographer. So I recently started growing my team and booking clients. And this is something that I had actually tried in the past. And I realized that the way that I tried it before does not work for my own personal ethics. There were certain things and certain gaps that I had. And so I shut this down several years ago and then now have reopened it. And when I was considering reopening the team, reopening this option within my brand, there were several key things that I personally thought of. And while I mentioned this before, that these are my own personal ethics, I truly wholeheartedly believe that if you're somebody who follows me, who wants to work with me, who has worked with me, these ethics will probably align with your own personal ethics as well about growing and scaling your own business and your own team. So the first thing I really thought about was the level of intentionality, which I've already hinted at, that I didn't want this to be like a flippant one-off option. I wanted this to be something where if I was going to offer this, it had to be advantageous in multiple different ways, but more than anything, it had to feel good. I had to feel like I was able to work with my associate team clients in a way that felt wholehearted to me. So that meant that they weren't getting less than just because I was not the person photographing their wedding day, whether that was a date restriction or a budget restriction. I very much so wanted to make sure that every client within my brand roster felt like they were intimately and deeply cared for by me and my team. So it couldn't be something where I was just flippantly offering like, well, I can find you an associate photographer if you really want to work with me. Like, no, we have photographers on deck. I found this photographer within our team that I think would be the best fit for you. That level of intentionality was really very, very, very important to me. Before I even put the idea of a team together, I really thought through, how can I make sure that I'm offering this as an equitable service to all clients who decide to invest within our brand, right? That was something that I personally considered. Within that level of intentionality was the level of client care. So I wanted to make sure that they had agency within what they were doing, that they weren't just kind of like shuffled off and getting one-off random communication. I wanted them to still get communication from me, communication from our studio manager, and communication from their own personal team photographer. That was something that enable, like, this sense of client communication and client care and compassionate communication is something that I wanted to keep consistent within the brand, because my brand is known for compassionate client care. We're known for taking really good care of people. And far be it from me to break that within the reputation because I just want to make a few extra dollars, right? So that was something that was very important to me, was that clients felt that they always were cared for, no matter who was photographing their wedding, and that they had access to quick and timely communication with us, compassionate communication with us, and agency within the communication process. Like I said before, I did not want to offer the typical studio model of saying, sure, you can sign up with us, but you're not going to get to know your person beforehand. Our team clients, and this is very intentional, our team clients have the ability to meet with their team photographer in any particular type of way within their package after they sign with us, right? So they can either schedule a virtual coffee date with our people. They have access to an engagement session with our people. They get to know them through email. They have one-on-one personal communication with their team photographer. So it's not something where somebody is just managing all of the communication and then sending somebody that they've contracted for a day to this particular wedding. This is a situation where the client has ongoing access to their team photographer and to other communication resources within the brand. And because of that, they get to feel cared for, right? Because of that, they get to feel like they're truly a part of our team, right? They're truly a part of our Sweet Alice family. And something that I think is really important to know is that obviously every business wants to grow and scale, right? Most, well, maybe not every, but maybe most. And growing and scaling as a wedding photographer is actually difficult because there comes a point where you're like, I need to diversify what I'm offering, and there's only a limited amount of diversification that you can offer, right? If you're a product-based business, that's different. But if you're a wedding photographer, there's a limit, right? What can you actually offer in your portfolio that will diversify your offerings? And it's limited, right? And one of those limitations, or one of those options within the limitations, will be like adding associates. But when we are considering adding associates to our business model, you have to investigate what's the outcome that you desire. Is it more impact? Is it more money? Is it more reach, right? There are multiple different things that can motivate you to be adding associates to your team. For me personally, though, the money was not one. So obviously I knew that in order to offer this, I had to turn some type of a profit, and I had to be able to pay my associates well, my team well. But at the end of the day, the main reason I offered this is because the demand was there. So I was meeting the demand, and because I wanted to offer options to people who may not have had the option prior, right? Again, whether that has to do with my date availability or like a budget constraint, right? So with that being said, those are all of the things that I was considering as an individual before I even offered this. And even when I was like sketching things out in my journal, I was like, this is a thing I want to offer. How can I make sure that it feels good for me to offer? It feels equitable for clients. It feels good for the team photographers. Everybody, what was even more paramount over these types of things is that I had to make sure that I felt good offering this, and everybody within the situation felt good too. And I wasn't going to offer something offhandedly. I wasn't going to offer something without planning. I wasn't going to offer this as an option to people without feeling good about offering it as an option. This was something that was very important to me, because when you have anything in your business that you don't feel good about offering, that is going to impact the way that you show up in your business, right? So if I'm feeling like a sleaze bag because I'm not offering the level of service that I want to offer to people, whether they're my own personal clients or they're the team's clients, I'm not going to show up well because I'm going to feel like a scumbag, right? So if I feel like a scumbag, I'm just not going to show up at all, because there's a part of me that feels ashamed. And when we feel ashamed, we don't show up. When we feel ashamed, we hide. And so it was important, over and above everything else, that if I were to offer this, it had to make sense and feel good for everybody involved. Me, the team photographers, the clients, everybody had to benefit in some way in order for me to feel good about offering it. So, as I thought through these things, um, there were also other considerations that are real, like business considerations to take into account. And I want to share with you what I considered before even offering this and bringing it back to the forefront as an option to work with us within the brand. So the first thing I had to ask myself is, do I have the actual demand for this? Am I turning away clients who seem very motivated and very interested in booking with me because of constraints? Most of the time, that's going to be my own personal availability or a budget constraint. Am I turning away a decent amount of clients, right? Like not just like one or two a year, but like a decent amount of clients who really want to work with me because of constraints in some particular type of way. If the demand is not there, but you want to offer this, that's great that you have this as a goal for the future, but it will be prematurely created. And when things are prematurely created in business, there's nothing to support them, right? And that's something that I think a lot of business owners do in multiple different ways, not only in this situation, but I think that a lot of business owners begin offering things prematurely. I did before, right? Like I did this with my team several years ago. But they begin offering it prematurely, or they implement things prematurely, right? And so it's great that we feel like so good about what we have within our portfolio and it feels exciting. But if you don't have things to back up what you're implementing and what you're beginning to offer, then that is prematurely done and it's going to become more of an expense in multiple ways, like energetically, time, money, than it's actually worth, right? So if you don't have the demand to implement a team of photographers, right? Like a team of associate photographers, the demand is not there. That's okay that you want it to be there at some point in the future. Don't implement this until you have significant demand. And the only way that you can understand that you have significant demand is by tracking your bookings, tracking your trends, and being really truthful about what the actual situation is. I think sometimes we implement things and we start doing things in business because we want to be where we're at, but sometimes it's not. If we build it, they will come. Sometimes it's just not. Sometimes you have to look at the facts and you have to be logical and you have to know, like, my feelings are a part of this and I can honor my feelings and I can honor my desires and I can honor my hopes, but I also need to be logical and not be taking on things that are not, like, the business is not ready to take on, right? The second thing I really thought about, and I had to implement this before I even offered this to the public, was the fact of, do I have the infrastructure to support this? This is something that I see as a real weight on offering associate photographers that people don't often consider, right? I think when we offer associate photographers, we offer like a team for people to book with, we think like, wow, this is so exciting, right? Like we have a team. We can present this as an option. We're getting more reach. We're getting more testimonials, right? But if you don't have the infrastructure to support it, you're going to have a problem at some point down the line, right? And there are going to be situations where you are unable to foresee what happened in that situation, right? There's always going to be a part of business where you're learning as you go, no matter what you do. But if you don't have the infrastructure that you pretty much know you need to be able to offer team photographers, then there will be a backlog and that will impact you, your team, and your clients. And because it impacts all three of those things, it's going to impact also your reputation. So you need to have an infrastructure in place because there's now going to be overflow, right? You are already within your processes for you yourself as the business owner, right? Like, you know what you do for every single wedding. You know how you show up for every single wedding. You know what planning you do with your particular primary clients. But now there's going to be overflow. There's going to be more people involved. There's going to be more expectations offered, right? And you're not going to be able to be the person to meet those expectations, right? And so there's going to be overflow. The overflow you're going to see is going to be in all areas, all areas. It's going to be, like I said before, in expectations. The overflow is also going to be in communication, right? You're going to be responsible for communicating to more people more often, and your team is now going to be responsible for communicating to more people. You're going to have a ton of editing overflow, right? And so what happens if you book all these team weddings and you're expecting that you're going to be the person editing them and you can't actually do it because you can't at some point you can't be a freaking one woman show. You can't, right? So what happens? What happens when there's an overflow of communication? What happens when there's an overflow of editing requirements, right? Or responsibilities, right? What happens when there's an overflow of deadlines? These are all things that you could manage yourself with your own processes personally, but now this has changed. Now this is different. It is not bad, it's different, but you have to have the infrastructure to support it. And what happens too? Like, do you have the infrastructure to handle emergencies when, let's just say you have a team photographer who had a second shooter that was going to be working with her, and the second shooter calls out sick? What goes on? But you're shooting a wedding. You can't be the person to handle all the mess. You can't be, right? Because your responsibility is to the wedding that you're at. So you can't be the person making the phone calls to be like, oh my God, can you emergency second shoot for me? What's your emergency infrastructure? You really have to think about these things. And these are things that people do not think about. These are things that, because offering a team feels shiny and exciting and new, and we're always chasing that next high in business, we sometimes do this. We sometimes implement this stuff prematurely, even if we have the demand. Even if we have the demand, we implement prematurely because we do not have the infrastructure required to support the demand, right? The third thing that I think is really important to consider, obviously from a business standpoint, is can you turn a decent profit while still paying your associate photographer as well? What I have seen in the wedding photography industry is that primary photographers are greedy. I have seen that they are super greedy. And any business owner is going to have that element of, I need to turn a profit in order for this to make sense, right? You can't just offer something because you want to offer it. You need to also have a profit, but you have to be willing to build packages that make sense for the profit that you desire to meet the demand that you have, while also still taking really good care of your team. If you don't take good care of your team, they're going to leave. They're going to leave. If they don't feel like they're given a hand in the types of clients that you book for them, they're going to leave. If they don't feel like they're being paid well for the level of service that they're offering, they're going to leave, right? And there's also an element here too that you have to honor the commitments that you make to your team. If you tell your team that you're going to pay them a certain thing and then you pay them differently, or you don't keep good records of what you're supposed to be paying them, or you have consistently, like, almost, your lack of trust plays out in the way that you pay your team, there's a problem, right? Like, if you're going to offer a team photographer, or you're going to book a team photographer, they're holding a date on their calendar for your clients a year out, pay them. Pay them well and pay them on time. And it shouldn't be one of those situations where, I know this might be like a unpopular opinion, but it should not be one of those situations where if you have a team photographer on deck and you say, I'm going to pay you 50% when you finish the wedding, like on the day of, and then 50% after I get the photos. No, that person has done their job. They have provided the service that you asked them to provide. They should not be being paid half and half, right? You shouldn't be holding this carrot over their head of payment when their responsibilities are already done, right? If they didn't take good photos and you're unhappy with their output, half of that responsibility actually falls on you. And I know that's hard to hear, and I know it's harsh to say, but it is your responsibility to hire associate photographers on your team that you are comfortable with the level of output that they always provide. And that is something too where you have to articulate your expectations. You can't just expect people to show up to a wedding day and know what they're doing if you have a different way of doing things, right? And that actually goes into what I was going to share next is, when you're building a team, when you're offering associate photographers, if you're doing it in a really intentional way, which I really think that most people should be doing at this point in time, right? You're being really intentional about who you're hiring, how you're taking care of clients, right? It shouldn't be this one-off like studio model. It should be a really boutique, like special experience for all people involved. But if you're going to be growing your team, are you ready to be a leader? Are you ready to step into a leadership role? Are you ready to take on responsibility for things that maybe you don't want to take responsibility for, but you have to because you are the business owner? And what I mean by that is, number one, can you articulate your expectations to your team? You should not be expecting anybody to read your mind. And that is the absolute truth. I think that in life and I think that in business, because it's not possible. It is not possible for you to say, I want you to feel, or when I look at your photos, I want to feel a type of way, right? And for somebody to understand that that is a personal feeling. So you need to actually break down that idea, and you need to take the responsibility of articulating it to be able to give the information to your team to be able to succeed in the way that you want them to and in the way that their clients want them to. So can you articulate your expectations? The responsibility of articulating your expectations is your responsibility as a business owner. And so if you're disappointed about something after the fact, or you're nervous about being disappointed before the fact, articulate it. Articulate it. People cannot know what is going on in your brain unless you tell them. And you have to articulate that. When people don't articulate their expectations, that is so lazy. It's so lazy. And I know it's hard to do. It is really hard to do. But I think, and I used to really struggle with that personally. But at this point in time, I think one of the biggest gifts that I've given to myself is the ability to articulate my expectations, right? And you can still articulate your expectations like kindly, but still be clear. And I think that's something too, where as a business owner, we can't be afraid of offending our team. Usually our team, and obviously, like if you're not being an asshole, right? But if you have hired the right people, then those people want you to be happy, right? And they want your clients to be happy. And so they're not going to be offended by you articulating your expectations, right? Like if you say, I would like you to shoot at this particular aperture for most of the day with this particular shutter speed, they're just going to do it because they want the guidance, because they want to do well, right? They want to do well for you, and they want to do well for their clients that they're serving on that particular day. Another thing to consider when you're thinking about, like, are you ready to be a leader in your business for a team, is, are you ready to stand in the gap for both and your clients and your team, right? Because there are going to be situations that just happen that aren't necessarily bad, but are going to require that you step in and say, like, hey, like this is okay, or hey, this isn't okay. And that can be handled in a really professional way. But it requires that you get out of your comfort zone and you stand in the gap for your people, right? And everybody here in this situation is your people. There's nobody who's like at odds, right? There's nobody who sucks. There's nobody who's like, oh my God, like these people are so icky. And I think that like us versus them mentality really needs to be taken out of the equation. I do see this in online groups sometimes where it's a very much so like an us versus them situation of a photographer against their client, right? But if you're not new here, you know that like if you booked the client that you booked, it's up to you to take ownership of the responsibility that you moved forward with the booking, right? That's on you. There have been situations that I've been in where I've been like, you know what? I'm curious about working with this client. I'm going to go into this with a spirit of curiosity rather than judgment, right? And that takes out the element of us versus them. But you have to be willing to be uncomfortable and stand in the gap in certain situations, whether it's for your team or it's for your clients towards your team, where you're ready to, it's not going to bat, but you're ready to offer mediation, potentially offer clarification, offer understanding. So are you willing to stand in the gap in situations like that? Is that something that you're willing to do? Is that something that you're willing to risk? Are you ready to do something like that? There's another thing to consider about being a leader is, are you willing to personally take on losses for the sake of learning lessons and taking good care of your team. Like I said before, you can put in all of the infrastructure that you know how to put in, but there are going to be certain situations that happen in your business that you're not going to know how to handle until they happen. And so that may mean that at some point you may have to spend something to be able to learn the lesson that that thing is teaching you, right? That may be time, that may be energy, that may be hiring, that may be money, right? And so are you willing to give up some of your profit, right? There's time profit, there's energy profit, there's money profit in order to ensure that your team succeeds, your team feels well taken care of, and you have basically paid what you needed to pay to learn the lesson that you needed to learn. Are you willing to take that on, right? The profit that you make from any particular package should be able to obviously make it worth it for you to be offering this type of thing in your business, but it also needs to you also need to understand that there is a potential that at some point you may need to dip into that profit to give to your team photographer because of a lesson that you had to learn. That is the truth. That's the absolute truth. And then the last thing here is that when people consider adding associates into their brand, there's risk. Are you willing to take a risk? Are you willing to risk things in your business in order to offer this in your business? There's risk. The more people you involve in your business, the more risk there is, because people are there's no guarantee of anything ever, right? And especially when you have people involved, there is risk. It's risky. So these are things that I want you to think about as you're considering adding this to your brand. Like, this is going to seem like big and exciting and shiny. And I know when I first publicized this, I was like, oh my God, like, this is so exciting. But these are all things that I had to consider prior and that I am considering ongoing, right? Because there's always going to be things that you have to consider ongoing, that element of risk, that element of leadership, that element of articulation, right? You have to be willing to do these things in order to offer this in a really wholehearted way. And if you're not willing to do this in a wholehearted way, can you abide by that? Or is this just going to feel heavy for your entire business journey? So thanks for being here today. I hope you learned something. And yeah, I just appreciate you all. Have a good one.